Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. More buffs have been coming in for Disc, and gear has been steadily increasing, which means Discipline Priest is on the rise in Mythic Plus, and I wanted to cover a couple of additional tips and tricks I've learned as I've progressed into higher level keys to 3.2k and beyond. Now, I did make a previous video talking about a shield-oriented build, and I've only really been running that in Dawnbreaker these days. It's really where you take like the standard talent build that you see here, and you take the points from Harsh Discipline and put those into Aegis of Wrath, Divine Aegis. You also take like the Painful Punishment point and put that into like Borrowed Time. Basically, it just kind of like makes it better for really heavy single target shielding that you have going on. But for all the other dungeons, I am running that standard build that is linked to my Wowhead guides in the description down below. Class talents changed quite a bit, since by default I like having them on for like disease dispels, but usually I'll be speccing into things like Words of the Pious for the extra like smite damage that you have going on pretty consistently to sort of help me along the way. I know some people are asking about Halo as well, and so I think Halo is way better than Phantom Reach. I've been seeing people running that in higher level keys, and it doesn't really seem to have too much of a point. You can really outrange most mechanics that you need to outrange without that ability, like outranging some of the stomps, for example. In Stone Vault, you can just outrange those at a 40-yard range already. Other mechanics, like in like Borealis, that you might want to like outrange, usually it's easier to line of sight because of just how quickly you're like boxed into those environments. So by default, I'm basically always using Halo. So when you're looking to improve and kind of building off of some of the things we've talked about previously in our M+ guides, yeah, you want to make sure you're taking advantage of Shadow Covenant. You have your Squid, your Void Wraith, your Mindbender. Yes, super powerful. You have your Entropic Rift. Your basic profile is going to be hitting your Radiance, hitting your Squid, hitting your Mind Blast, and pumping out some huge damage. If there isn't healing to do right away, you can delay your Radiance until after you've applied your Squid, after you've applied your Rift, so that the Rift detonation is going to go off while you have that Radiance going. If there is currently damage that you needed to heal right away, then usually you just refresh your Radiance to cast it again, make sure it captures that Rift explosion, and then you hit that Mind Blast, followed up with a big Penance, followed up with Shadow or Death, Halo, lots of smites, which is turning into the Void Blast, and that's your usual damage profile and how you're setting up a lot of your healing. To go beyond this gameplay and look at how you can really improve the most, after every dungeon, I'm almost always looking at my Shadow Covenant uptime and my Rift uptime, my Entropic Rift uptime. You can also look at Void Heart uptime, as that's similar. What this is going to do is going to show you how much you're getting your pet out, how much you're getting your Rift out, and you should be really looking to have like mid 40s or higher depending on the dungeon. Some of them might be a little bit lower, some might be a little bit higher depending on how much damage is going out. But you really need to be looking at increasing your Shadow Covenant and your Rift uptimes, because they play a massive role in just the overall damage and overall healing that you're really able to produce. It makes such a significant impact on really everything, and the more time that you spend like individually applying atonements to heal others, the lower that your Rift uptime is going to be, and the lower that your Shadow Covenant is going to be. That's why Radiance is so important, even if it produces a lot of overhealing by putting atonement on full health characters. That's why it's so efficient to just put it out onto everybody, because individually applying atonements and then casting some damage is usually really inefficient if somebody else new takes an additional hit. Of course, your uptimes are going to vary a lot depending on your gear and also depending on your haste. The biggest priority, my gear is like haste mastery right now because of raiding, but once I kill Queen Anzarek, it's going to be really hard set towards haste versatility to optimize my survivability in a dungeon. But as best as I possibly can, I am going to be stacking tons of haste because it makes a massive difference on Mind Blast, which is a hasted cooldown to give you more Rift uptime. And of course, the more Shadow Covenant uptime you get can also be very dependent on your haste with how many smites that you're going to be able to cast. And let me tell you, if you're just getting into Disc, nothing is more fun than having huge amounts of haste to really cover your allies with healing and blast huge amounts of damage. The only thing that I think might be more fun is being able to learn back-end web development from start to finish with our sponsor today in boot.dev. They believe, just like in World of Warcraft, that the best way to learn is by doing, and so they've built an amazing platform to teach you both the Python and Go programming languages languages for back-end web development from start to finish in a way that feels just like a captivating RPG game. It's online, self-paced, and has a vibrant community on Discord so that you're really never alone throughout the learning process. To keep you on track in your learning journey, they have tons of quests, XP, levels, and achievements alongside a global leaderboard to keep you on track throughout your learning journey. They also are designing all of their game features on the site to keep you motivated and moving towards that future goal of job-ready programming skills. They also have bi-monthly boss fights where the community rallies together, gaining bonus XP for each lesson completed during the event. If you're interested in getting into back-end web development, keep in mind, boot.dev's site is free to read and watch in guest mode. And if you're ready to dive into it, click the link in the description box down below and use my code AutomaticJak to get 25% off your first month or even your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Huge thank you to boot.dev, and let's continue. While your Shadow Covenant uptime and Rift uptime are going to be big picture metrics that you want to look at to track your progression throughout, there's also going to be a lot of micro in terms of your gameplay that you can use to optimize. There are going to be moments, for example, where you want to be using your Rift or you want to use your Shadow Covenant at very specific moments to be able to blast huge amounts of healing. Some of the things are going to be on like Edna as an example, the first boss of Stone Vault. This boss has spikes coming in all around the room onto player locations, and then when they explode, they also deal ticking damage. Well, usually pug strats will kill them with the lasers, but if you can communicate to people that you want to have it so that the boss's smash actually breaks all the rest of the spikes, you can hold your Shadow Covenant and hold your Rift for those exact moments, having huge amounts of healing to reverse all that incoming damage. And it's even easier when people are having defenses being used at the same time, or you have your barrier on the group or most of the group at the same time. You have paints up on yourself, paints up on other people to be able to deal with those moments. That's really a huge area that Disc is super strong on. Additionally, City of Threads, I've had a number of questions on the third and fourth bosses. On the third boss in City of Threads, for example, you want to do the same thing. Watch the boss's energy and then time your Shadow Covenant and your Rift to blast huge amounts of healing for the big AoEs going out. What that also involves is that you have to kind of stop soaking at a certain point, kind of take stock of what resources you have on hand. Since that boss doesn't really truck the tank, the coagulum, you can pretty much use paints upon yourself or somebody else who has a really huge amount of absorb on them. And then as you get all of your output rolling, as you stack your Rift and your Shadow Covenant and everything together, that's usually the area where you can blast tons of healing. So on the pull, the boss has a lot of energy. I might rip my Rift on pull, and then as the boss is getting higher in energy, I'll hold my Shadow Covenant, hit it around 90-95% energy or something like that, have my Rift rolling soon afterwards, and then I'm just pounding damage the entire time as the AoE is going off, healing off the absorb, and healing up players as they take the additional damage hits. This is really, really challenging to set up at first, especially if your group isn't actually soaking properly, but the more you can stack those defensives for those key moments, the easier your life's going to be. Same thing in the final boss of City of Threads. When you have the Splice debuff coming out, it goes Splice into Root, then Splice into Stomp, and then it goes into Tank Buster. What you want to do there is the same principle, using either your Rift or your Shadow Covenant or both to always be ready for the Splice debuff, reversing that ticking damage so that everyone is going to be as healthy as they possibly can before the burst of AoE that comes from either the Root or from the Stomp. What people fall into as like a trap is that they might hit the Rift when the Tank Buster is going out, and they're blasting some healing into the tanks, but that's usually an area where you want to external the tanks or have some shields ready for the tanks or something. You don't really need to have your Rift there because it's also going to mean you don't have your Rift going forward when you have the combinations of Splice into Stomp, into major damage. And so you want to make sure you don't kind of fall into those traps and not have your Rift for some of the key moments going on. You can also use a cancelaura. I'll have an image right here. I'll have it linked in the description down below. If you ever get into a situation where you just need healing now, you technically can cancel your Rift early to trigger the detonation to get some kind of burst output on hand. I maybe do it once a key, if that, but it's one of those like emergency things, or it can be good to use if the entire trash pack's like about to die and you just sent out your Rift. There's a couple of options that you have on there, but it'll basically trigger the explosion, give you a burst of atonement healing, and might be enough to save somebody's life. Now, the cooldown we haven't been talking about is Rapture, and I've been using this a lot differently than I did in Dragonflight. Now that they made the change to Rapture so that you get 5 shields, it's also a change I made to the talent build since our old Mythic Plus video, is I'm taking all of the shields I can get from Rapture. You have, 30 seconds after you activate the ability to cast those empowered shields. And so I used to just push out a whole bunch of shields and use that for atonement coverage. But I find that I really don't need that anymore. And in fact, since the spec really doesn't do much single target healing, doesn't really do much, I guess you could call it direct healing, flash heal, radiance, etc. I know they got buffed, but they're still pretty weak. What you really want to do is use your shields as your pseudo spot heal. And so that what that means is that when you are dealing with moments where one person takes damage on a trash pack, your usual response is to hit radiance on everybody and start blasting damage. But you get into some situations, especially when you're in between rift uptime, or if there's a lot of damage that's kind of going out from all these casters that nobody's kicking. What's really helpful is instead of just having somebody at 20% life and then trying to atone them up to full, you hit Rapture on them. They then have a 50% of their health shield, give or take. Since you're stacking up your 4-set bonus, your mastery increases the shields if the target has atonement on them, and you have Wheel and Woe to sort of modify the potential output of your shield, the size of your shield. And so what you do is, while atonement's already running on everybody, one person takes a huge hit, you put a Rapture shield on them, and then you keep Rapture rolling so that you can instantly react, respond, and have, an oh no button on hand to put shields on people as they drop low. Oh, another bolt cast went off and hit that exact same person at 20 or 30% life, and they had a 50% shield. Well, you just apply a shield again, and then you keep on blasting with atonement healing, killing the trash pack faster because of your damage, and increasing your Shadow Covenant Rift uptime, and also just more efficiently healing the group in general. If some other players are dropping low, if other burst damage is happening, those additional smites bring you closer to your next Shadow Covenant uptime, for example. You're spending more time dealing damage to produce healing. You're already pushing up somebody's health bar that dropped low while they have a shield on them, and they're getting healthier by the minute as that shield acts as a temporary buffer to keep them alive. It's also insanely important to know that as a priest, you are still super squishy, and there's times where before incoming damage, I'll just drop a shield into myself or onto somebody else that might be squishy, just to make sure there's a little bit of extra buffer so you don't get caught off guard. Keep in mind you have fade damage reduction, desperate prayer, stamina increase, and protective light, and shield to help you along the way to keep yourself alive. And if there's one thing I would always recommend, is that if you are learning throughout these dungeons and you understand that bosses like the Coagulum, or if somebody's doing a good job tanking the Edna fight in Stone Vault and they're not needing these externals with Paints Up or Barrier, that you're using them for yourself or whoever else in the group is also going to be squishy. I love how Cell's raid frames highlight people's defensive usage on the left side. It's very customizable. I have my Cell guide as well in the description below alongside my UI if you wanted to yoink that or make some adjustments. I have it all there, but seeing and understanding what defensives people have on hand can influence your decision to use Paints Up on them, to use a shield on them, to help deal with some of the incoming burst damage a little bit more easily so that somebody doesn't unexpectedly just die and collapse. Super awesome bonus tip. This is something I neglected to do early on in the season when I first got Gala Shadows, but you should be running this trinket for high level keys. And keep in mind, periodic effects stack it and extend its duration, which means using Renew in between trash pulls is actually really nice to continue having this 3,000 intellect buff rolling from pack to pack. You should always be looking to maintain that as much as you possibly can throughout the dungeons, and it's just going to make your life so much easier when you constantly have that buff stacked up to full really the entire time. Last thing I would say is keep in mind health pot usage is always going to be good. If you know you're going to drop low, you don't have defensives, health pots are basically a lay on hands, so you can kind of think into yourself that you're definitely going to use health pot the second that you drop low when you have this expected damage coming out on a boss fight. It's always a great way to do it. I am very super mindful about holding Shadow Covenant and holding onto my Rift for specific damage events on boss fights, but I'm extremely aggressive on just sending them out on trash pulls. That's kind of the rule of thumb that I've done it for very specific priority mini bosses or something like that. Dawnbreaker, having to deal with some of the AoE damage that you have out of the final mini boss as well. And Dawnbreaker is the other one I'm thinking of. Oh, even the AoE and like Stone Vault, if you know that's coming, for example, from the despoilers going into like the Scarden section, that's another area you might hold on to your Rift or your Shadow Covenant. But in general, if there's no special priority mob, work on being aggressive with sending your Rift, your Shadow Covenant out. Use Rapture to be your spot heal resource, your emergency resource, and having it rolling when you need to. And be aggressive with those pain subs and barriers as well. If you enjoyed this content and want to support it further, be sure to check out our Patreon. And huge thank you to our patrons for making all of this possible. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. And let me know if I missed any other boss fights or you have any other questions, guys. Take it easy.